Focus Brazil. Could gambling legalization save Brazil from its financial crisis?
Bem-vindo à SiGMA Latam, Focus Brasil.
Welcome to SiGMA, Latam, Focus Brazil. I am pleased to be accompanied by three distinguished experts and authentic warriors in the regulatory process in Brazil. We will discuss the potential of the market and the current state of the regulatory framework.
E também o estado atual da regulamentação. O Brasil é dos mercados emergentes mais falados na indústria do jogo.
Brazil is one of the most talked about emerging markets in the gaming industry, with 211 million people and a considerable appetite for football, sports, and other forms of gambling. Gambling had been banned for over 70 years. However, in these last months, there have been advances in the form of regulation and legislation of gambling in Brazil. The process does not seem to be going so slow anymore. Luiz, let's start with you. If you can give us a brief overview of the situation we are in particular, the recent announcements that the BNDES will be responsible for the process going forward.
Em que o BNDES vai ser responsável pelo processo daqui para a frente.
Sim. Bom, Marco, obrigado. Primeiro, obrigado a SiGMA pelo convite.
Thank you, Mark, and SiGMA for the invitation to participate in this debate. In fact, in recent months, there have been considerable advances. Recently, a presidential decree was published in which the BNDES was designated as responsible for conducting the privatization process for sports betting under coordination and monitoring of the Ministry of Economy. So this process is now on the government's priority agenda, and it must move quickly. We hope that in the coming months we will have specialists contracted by the BNDES to carry out regulatory and economic studies to define a model, concession or authorization, but a grant model and a regulation model. Next year we expect to see the regulation ready, and it will probably bring a licensing process.
Provavelmente o processo de licença. Tá? A gente também tem visto avanço muito grande na discussão de cassino.
We have also seen a huge advance in the casino discussion. There was a group formed within the government discussing the issue. There is a Tourism Development Studies Committee, which is an interministerial committee discussing various issues for tourism development in Brazil. Among these issues is the casino issue. It is an important matter, and they are discussing what the ideal casino model for Brazil will be. In the same way, within Congress, there is also a discussion on the topic.
Da mesma forma, dentro do Congresso também existe uma discussão sobre o tema.
Obviamente, apostas esportivas têm sido
Obviously, sports betting has been the biggest topic in terms of speed of regulation. In terms of casinos, Witoldo.
Witoldo, sei que tu tens...
I know that you have your own opinion about the format or model of the concessions. Which are your expectations regarding the regulation of casinos?
Qual é que é a tua expectativa em relação à regulamentação do casino?
Bom dia, Mark.
Good morning, Mark. Good morning to everyone. Thank you to SiGMA for the invitation. Quickly, without wasting too much time explaining, as I was told that time is short. You are right, Mark. What seemed like a forbidden issue to talk about in government has been discovered to have already been talked about, somewhat backstage. It all went public when we had a ministerial meeting that had been recorded and was all publicized. And now we can really see what people inside the ministry were concerned about with this type of economic activity, social activity and tourist activity. Until now, many people had the feeling that this was a prohibited subject within the federal government because of the slightly more evangelical line, a little more Catholic Christian of the President Bolsonaro. President Bolsonaro, while he was a deputy, I met him in his office just like I do with several other deputies, and I went there to talk to him about gambling. At the time, I remember him speaking in a very clear way. He said the following: I think we have to regulate, but in the way that each state does its own regulation. We have to remove the ban, and each state will do what it wants. It was an interesting but mostly useful position for us because it is moving in one direction. The lobby that was made here in Brazil, and especially the image that has been passed on, is that the casino is an attractive vertical for tourism. That is why we see a large part of the discussion with the government beginning with tourism. We can see the Secretary of Tourism and the Minister of Tourism speaking about it, as if it were only an attractive vertical for tourism, specifically, and not talking as an economic activity as a whole. I would like to see this move forward towards a scenario where all types of casinos were legalized, and not just those integrated into resort structures, as we see in some places around the world. My idea is that if we look at the Lisbon casino, the Estoril casino, for example, we look at the racecourse and see that they have been operating for decades in a consistent and profitable way without having an integrated resort. So I think we should look at that perspective as well. The only fear I have is that it will keep the image of something that's sole purpose is to attract tourists here. I honestly can't imagine anyone leaving from Paris and coming to Brazil just because they are interested in gambling some money at a Brazilian casino. People visit Brazil because they want to see the country. If you have a casino, it is a lot more fun. But I don't think it is a distinctive feature in tourists' decision to travel to Maldives or Fernando de Noronha.
That's why Brazil has a very active population in casinos in neighboring countries.
Nos casinos dos países vizinhos, é verdade.
It's true. Maybe having a casino that is attached to a resort is enough for money to stop leaving the country, so that we have financial gain from it. However, I would like to see a broader model being discussed, but I believe that any progress is welcome. So, if we are on the way to integrated resorts, so be it. I think we lose in employability and we lose in economic terms. This reminds me of an argument I had. On one of those trips to Brasilia, I met a representative from our industry federation there. And I asked him what his position is regarding the legalization of gambling. He said, "We don't have a position. This is a political position, and we have no interest in speaking out about it." And I said, they should have a position, because if we have a gambling model, you will participate in it as well. If we have a broad model, someone will call you and say, "I need 1 million knives, 1 million forks. I need 1 billion napkin papers, stamped with the bingo house logo, the casino logo, the resort." It's another level of indirect employability, which requires the need to build a chair, table, monitors, towel, napkin, fork and knife, cup, and a multitude of indirect things. The participation of the Federation of Industry would be positively, directly be affected by this.
Então, essa é a minha maneira, assim, tentei ser resumido, Mark.
Okay. Regarding the financial aspect, there are several studies, but I think the most respected is one of KPMG's 2017 reports, which estimates that in the first year after regulation, the Brazilian market will be worth about $2 billion.
Dos 2 bilhões de dólares. Magno, achas
Magnho, do you think the study still has a foundation? It has been 3 years since the study, and at the same time, a study by the Legal Gaming Institute which you chair, estimated that illegal gambling in Brazil also generated around $6.4 to $6.5 billion in the same year.
Na ordem de 6,4, 6,5 bilhões de dólares.
Ok, olá Luiz. Olá Witoldo. Olá Mark. Obrigado SiGMA pelo convite.
Hi, Mark, and thank you, SiGMA, for the invitation. The viability of the KPMG study will depend on the model that is chosen for the operation.
Também de como as outras modalidades serão tratadas ao longo dos anos. Eu vou te explicar por que eu tenho esse entendimento.
It will also depend on how other modalities will be treated over the years. I'll explain why I have this understanding.
Na zona cinzenta. Infelizmente, a questão do jogo no Brasil vem sendo tratada ao longo dos últimos anos.
Brazil has a very large number of illegal or clandestine gambling, or in the gray market.
Como uma questão de costume, enquanto no mundo inteiro.
The question of gambling in Brazil has been discussed over the last 78 years, and 2 months from now it has been dealt with in a matter of traditions. While worldwide it has been treated as an economic activity.
E ela também não é regulamentada, legalizada e regulamentada. Hoje esse movimento continua muito alto.
This great issue of illegal gambling is not fought, nor is it legalized or regulated. Today, this movement is still very high. The issue of illegal gambling is still very widespread. Thanks to the work of some people who are willing to go to Brasilia very often, we are managing to change the scenario. And today, we have 2 legal projects that are ready to be voted by the plenary, by both the Senate and the Deputies' Chamber.
Todas verticais.
And we as an institute defend the legalization of all modalities and verticals. And there is no point in Brazil legalizing only integrated resorts with casinos and leaving all other modalities in hiding and illegality. I think this is an extremely important step, although I believe that we started off wrong because regulated markets were matured first, and then we legalized and regulated online gambling. Here in Brazil, we started off on the roof by initially legalizing sports betting and leaving all other modalities on the margins of hiding.
Online, e aqui no Brasil, nós começamos pelo telhado, legalizando inicialmente as apostas e deixando todas as outras modalidades à margem da clandestinidade.
In terms
of the illegal market at the moment in Brazil, it is as huge as is confirmed.
Se confirma. Luiz, tu nas nossas conversas.
Luiz, in our previous conversations, you said that Brazil is a world champion in illegal gambling, to the extent that regulation in an ideal world, with all regulated modalities, attracts existing operators in the market and new international operators. To what extent can regulation be a cure for illegal gambling in Brazil, whilst at the same time increasing tax revenues as a result?
O jogo ilegal no Brasil e ao mesmo tempo aumentar as receitas tributárias por consequência.
Essa afirmação, na verdade, é do Magnho.
That statement is actually from Magnho. I don't want to say it, but I actually agree. I completely agree. But the fact is, it is regulation and the tax burden that will define the size of the market, or rather it will define the size of the legal market, and, consequently, the size of the illegal market. Because if the tax burden is too high, then it will serve as an incentive for operators to remain in the grey or black market. It will also be a disincentive for legitimate and serious operators to come to the country.
Se a carga tributária for muito alta, isso vai servir como incentivo para que operadores permaneçam.
If the regulation is very complex, or if it is what we usually call jabuticaba in Brazil.
Operadores legítimos, operadores sérios venham para o país. Se a regulamentação for
Jabuticaba is a small fruit that is only found in Brazil, and we have a habit of inventing jabuticaba law and regulation which only exists in Brazil. This is the case with our plugs. Every country in the world has a patent plug. In Brazil, there is one that you will find only here. So if we keep creating jabuticaba that keeps international investors away, consequently making life difficult for investors.
Se a gente ficar criando jabuticaba, afasta o investidor internacional, consequentemente dificulta a vida do investidor. Não é isso que eu vejo acontecer, tá? Nas conversas
falaste nos operadores.
You talked about international operators. To what extent is it possible or desirable for international operators to be involved in this discussion at the governmental level to assist in the process so that regulation can be done the best way?
O envolvimento de operadores internacionais para ajudar no processo para que a regulamentação possa ser feita da melhor maneira.
É importantíssimo. É importantíssimo e...
It is very important, and the regulator is very open to dialogue with international operators. We see a great concern by the regulator in not creating jabuticaba, in following international standards, and in creating regulations that work. We see the regulator opening up to dialogue, receiving operators, wanting to understand the market, wanting to do something that works. As an industry, we have to take advantage of this space that exists. That is not very common for the realities in Brazil.
Muito comum para a realidade brasileira. Então, aproveitar esse espaço que existe.
So take advantage of this space that exists and really be present. Go talk to them, show them, explain to them, and participate more actively in this process. This is what we do in our daily lives. It is providing information to the regulator in order to assist in this regulatory process. We have a common goal, which is we want good regulation. We don't want X or Y regulation. We want good regulation. If it is good, the market will be good. It will work. It doesn't have to be an A, B, or C regulation. It doesn't necessarily have to follow the English, Danish, or Spanish model. If it is a regulation that works, that has reasonable taxation, a regulation that allows the operator to have reasonable freedom to develop his product, then it will work.
Permitir que o operador tenha uma liberdade razoável para desenvolver o seu produto, vai funcionar.
Agora, se calhar a maior questão de todas.
Now, a bigger escalation and a question for this panel.
Fala-se muito em muitos países.
There is a lot of discussion in many countries that are going through this regulatory process, and in my experience, the estimates of the governments themselves are almost never right. I know this is a question that may be difficult to answer, but since we are talking about gambling, then we can place a bet here between the four of us. In which semester and in what year and when do you three think the first legal sports bet in Brazil would be placed?
Vamos dizer, a primeira aposta desportiva legal no Brasil. Witoldo, podemos começar por ti, talvez?
Is the question, when will we have the first sports bet in Brazil?
Yes, and it's worth a dinner with Portuguese wine too.
Opa.
Aposta aceita.
Eu espero não perder, porque as pessoas que bebem vinho nesse painel...
Mark, I hope I don't lose this bet, because the people on this panel drink a lot of wine, and I don't think I will be able to pay the bill. Until last year, I was deluded by this new proposal. We went through some situations where you examined and identified that the vote would take place at that moment. There was an occasion in 2016. Luiz Felipe was there. Magnho was there. I was there. We were inside the National Congress. So for a while I was convinced that things would happen in the near future. And it was not an unfounded delusion. In December 2016, we were all at the National Congress. Magnho was there, Felipe was there, I was there too. The law project was in. The paper was on the Deputy President's desk to vote. We all made our statement there in the plenary of the National Congress. Some in favor, others against. And when I was going to vote, the session was interrupted. A ceremony took place, a festive occasion, a medal offering. I don't know exactly what it was, and the project came out of the vote and did not vote.
E na hora que ia votar, a sessão foi interrompida, entrou uma solenidade.
Yes, this is one of the examples. But since then, we had some occasions where you looked at it and said they will vote now, next week, and everyone runs out of their states, their offices, their houses, to go to Brasilia, because they said the law would be voted on. So it was not an unfounded opinion. But now, looking at the thing with more calm experience, 7 years doing this, at least for me, my bet, my guess, is the second half of next year. I think we are going to have something concrete. I'm just not going to use the term sports betting legalized in Brazil, because the bets made today are legalized. They are bets made abroad by a Brazilian in a .com domain. So I cannot say that they are illegal or even irregular. For me, it is more about a regulated Brazilian environment with a Brazilian company behind that business. I think that the second half of next year is a good time frame for us, because if we have to go later, we will enter the electoral year, and things in the electoral year do not usually go the way people wait. Everything stops. So that's my bet in the second half of next year.
Tudo para. Então, essa é a minha aposta. Segundo semestre do ano que vem. Agora eu deixo com vocês aí.
Magnho?
Eu vou discordar pouquinho do
I'm going to disagree with Witoldo a little, because I think there's a process going on. The election year issue will not interfere with the start of sports betting. What can change in the terms of sports betting is the question of necessary adjustments in the legislation that was passed in 2018. I think that this legislation, from the study of the BNDES, will need to make several adjustments to the law. These adjustments will be proposed by the BNDES study. So depending on this study, depending on the referral, then we can have an operation.
Dependendo desse estudo, dependendo deste encaminhamento, nós podemos ter uma alteração de data, mas a princípio.
But in principle, if everything goes smoothly, I believe that we will have this first sports bet in a company based in Brazil, that is to say, based in the Brazilian legislation. In the first half of 2022, because what you do after regulations are published, there is a need for the calling of companies. So we will have a gap for a few months so that these companies can come and inform the government that they want to participate and that they will be qualified to participate. And there is also the question of certification companies, because the government will have to call these certifying companies from this certifying laboratory. That's why, in my opinion, it will only happen in the first half of 2022. And with regard to other modalities, we have other expectations. And then another time we can talk.
Nós temos outras expectativas que aí, oportunamente, a gente pode falar.
Luiz, do you also hold this opinion that the study carried out by the BNDES will somewhat delay the start?
Atrasar pouco o início.
Eu compartilho a opinião do Magnho. Eu acho que assim, fazendo aqui um exercício de futurologia, tá?
I share Magnio's opinion. Let's do a forecasting exercise here. Let's say that the BNDES is now bidding to hire specialists in September and will be able to do that by the end of September. That the specialists will be able to do the study in 3 months They will deliver it in late December.
O BNDES coloque
Now the regulations come out by the end of February. BNDES will make a public consultation, place a public notice on the street to do the privatization until the end of May, and manage to do the privatization by the end of August. Still, you have to pay attention to the certifying labs. These companies have a deadline for implementation. There is the question of software certification.
Tem a questão de certificação de software. Tem uma série de coisas.
There are a number of things. There is a whole part of signing an administrative contract. We saw how long it took at Lotex. I believe the first half of 2022 we will see the first sports bet being made by a Brazilian operator.
Vai ver a primeira aposta esportiva sendo feita num operador brasileiro.
Ok. Meus senhores, chegamos ao fim do nosso tempo. Temos aqui uns palpites.
Gentlemen, we have reached the end of our time. We have heard some informed tips about when we will have the first bet in Brazil. Thank you very much for your participation, Luiz, Witoldo, and Magnho.
Muito obrigado à SiGMA por este tempo, para este painel, e espero daqui a...
Thank you very much to SiGMA for this panel, and I hope to be here in the next year or two and hopefully discuss with you how the regulated gaming industry is going in Brazil. Thank you very much.
Magnho, Felipe, abraço. Tchau.
Magnho, Witoldo, Mark, obrigado.
Nada, fiquem 5 segundos agora.